he is the CEOC Legislative Committee and the CEOC Functional Recovery Working Group, and he also is the chair of the FEMA NIST Functional Recovery Working Committee. So with that, Brian.
I thought you said you were going to let me make the introduction. So I do wear many hats. I will not claim to be the expert on all the different activities, but I do want to try to give you an update on what I'm aware of, what I've been involved with. As John was saying, I am primarily, my role is CEOC Legislative Committee Chair. I'm now chairing or leading a working group on functional recovery within the CEOC. I participate as chair of the FEMA NIST Functional Recovery Committee of Experts, or committee as they're calling it. I'm on the NEHRP Advisory Committee at the federal level. I work with the ERI on a public policy committee as well, although I don't lead that, I just call them when I can. So lots of hats to wear. Today I'm not putting any particular logo on my slides. It's mostly me trying to tell you what's been happening around you if you haven't been aware of it. So with that, I've already used up a minute of my 15 minutes. John is trying to get me to tell you all about this stuff in 15 minutes. It's a challenge, but the main point I will try to make to you is that there's been a lot of progress on functional recovery. Do we have all the answers yet? Obviously not. But there's been a lot of progress in a short amount of time. Even since July, there's been a number of developments, a number of activities, and I will try to highlight to you some of these just so you're aware of the surroundings, and then also kind of where we're looking to go from here. So functional recovery concepts, almost half the room was not in the July thing, so I wasn't going to go point by point, but at least from a few high-level parts. There are some tools here that you can go back to the presentations from July to get yourself up to speed. I want to make sure people understand this is not like a CEOC thing, this is not an engineering thing, this is certainly not a Ryan Kersting thing. This is really us responding to interest from the public. Whether it's elected officials or local jurisdictions, they've been asking us about building codes. They've been asking us about what we can do beyond just providing safety. What are building codes targeting for recovery or performance in terms of repair time? And we've wanted to engage in that because we've seen some ideas out there that maybe, at least as an engineer, structural engineer, haven't always been the whole story, right? So we've needed to engage to try to fill in some of the blanks and try to at least participate so that we're working together on a common goal and a common solution. We are working on the a draft definition from AB 393. I know the ICC conversations are about new buildings. The AB 393 was talking mostly about new buildings. We are working on more of a consensus definition as part of the FEMA NIST committee that would deal more with something that could apply to new or existing buildings, but also to infrastructure lifeline systems, right? So you'll see in my little draft here, it doesn't talk about buildings, it doesn't talk about structural, non-structural. It talks about restoring or maintaining capacity after an earthquake. And we talk about the time aspect of functional recovery in that, just as it is right now, it's a performance level, and Susan's going to be on our definitions committee, part of the FEMA NIST group, because there are different ways to describe functional recovery, and you have to be clear about it. On its own, functional recovery isn't associated with the time. You can have different times associated with depending on the building you're talking about, right? So I think I heard in your center stage thing the other day, somebody mentioned, for hospitals, functional recovery is essentially immediate. It happens immediately, it's recovering quickly. For other buildings, you can have functional recovery, but you might allow it to be longer term. You might allow it to be weeks, months, maybe even a year for certain types of buildings, depending on what you need and what you want out of that use or facility. And functional recovery is not community resilience, right? It's going to be associated with community resilience, but it's not community resilience. It's our tool as engineers, as building officials, as designers, to target a performance for our built environment that contributes to community resilience, okay? I'm not the expert in community resilience by any means, but I just know it's not community resilience. So AB 393, I think I'm going to go quickly on this because a lot of this ends up kind of coming to a sour conclusion, or at least a softer conclusion than maybe some of us had hoped. It was a great bill. We know it wasn't a perfect bill. There was a lot of support for it from different sets of groups. It was nearly unanimously supported through the Assembly side, the House of Origin in the California legislature, but it stalled in the Senate side of the committee, or the Senate side of the process. It didn't clear its last hurdle, so it didn't make it to a floor vote. We at CEOC, and we know with Assembly Member Nazarian's help, we're committed to working on moving this forward. I think we realize there's more stakeholders that need to be part of the process. There's also, as we've talked about, the political process is a little bit out of our control. So there's lessons learned there. But we're not using this as our final solution or our final end to the legislative efforts in California. There are going to be continued efforts moving forward. Some of the other things that have been mentioned already, so I don't need to dwell on them deeply, but there is at least a link here to the EERI white paper that did get issued. It was like the day before, the day after our roundtable in Sacramento. It's a great resource, and it talks about the entire spectrum. It talks about new, existing infrastructure, lifelines. It talks about how to arrange our thoughts in terms of the issue areas that we're going to need to develop, definitions, policies, technical aspects, how do we implement it going forward. And it really helps us compartmentalize some of those conversations. It also talks about motivating us, as someone said earlier, about making sure we're doing things in tandem or in parallel, not waiting for one thing to finish before we jump to the next thing. I know I use it too often, my kids get tired of it. There's too many chickens and eggs in this functional recovery basket right now. If we wait for every chicken and egg to figure out itself, we're not going to make progress. And when I am out there talking with public officials and policymakers, they're asking us to take our engineer's hat off. They're asking us not to be perfect. They're willing to let us have multiple generations or versions of this standard as it gets developed and refined. They don't want perfection to be the enemy of progress. They're not even asking for good, they just want progress. As a community advocate, as our elected officials, they're asking for progress. And we need to be able to respond to that without saying, we don't have an answer yet, while somebody else gives an answer that actually makes things worse. Okay, so we got to use that as our motivation in the arena. The CLO Functional Recovery Working Group is kind of a subset of the Legislative Committee and the CLO Resilience Committee. It's been working with EERI and ATC and HP Risk Group, who, if you don't know, has a proprietary software that does performance-based assessments, looking beyond just the safety aspects of building design and building performance. And we're working with other groups too. There were two great presentations at the CLO convention a month or so ago that I can make available to you if anybody wants them. You can contact Susan, she can find me and I can make those available. There was just a webinar yesterday as well that recapped some of those presentations. Jonathan, I missed it, so I assume it went well because I know the first two were fantastic. But it's not just, again, it's not just an engineering aspect that we're trying to tackle here. We realize, and the Resilience Committee and the Functional Recovery Working Group realize that there's different roles, different areas of influence, different relationships that we're going to have as engineers, as community leaders, as policymakers. And we're trying to bring those all to bear into this committee. We know it's hosted by the structural engineers. We're trying to bring all those perspectives to bear as we think about what is functional recovery, how it relates to community resilience. We've also been hearing from Kurt Hazelton, who couldn't make it to the last minute change of plans. He's been doing a lot of studies for HP Risk Group and then also partnering with ATC on some things to quantify the performance that the current code, even the 2018 IBC and ASC 716, would provide in terms of beyond just safety, right? Our codes do a great job. Our current codes do a great job for safety. We're being asked to, what do they do about time and cost of damage and repair? And so Kurt's been doing a lot of studies that are estimating the performance for risk category 2 buildings is putting us out in the 6 to 24 months of time to recover after different levels of design event. The design event or maybe the NC, the maximum event. And when the committee asks us what it's going to take to get back into the building, we explain to them that our building codes are meant to get you out safely, but doesn't guarantee you get back in. They say, well, how quick can we get back in? And we start to throw these numbers out there, and they start to say, whoa, wait a second, I'm not going to have a home for 6 months. I'm not going to be able to do my job for 6 months or for a year. I can't get my kids to daycare. Maybe their schools, even though schools are slightly designed higher, they're not going to be open right away necessarily. And so it starts to weigh on them and their understanding of building performance, and just the code minimum is great for I'm glad I'm safe. But what about my way of life? What about my livelihood? How am I going to continue my way of life? And so that question, is this acceptable in the eyes of the public, is really what's been motivating a lot of these conversations. And the policymakers have been picking up on it. When I say policymakers, it's whether it's a local jurisdiction or a statewide elected official, they're definitely picking up on this. Now, risk category 4, we know it gives you better performance, but it may not be the end-all be-all. Let's be honest, okay? We know that it's, I was just saying, this is Vegas, there should be lots of smoke-filled rooms around here to use as an example, but we know a lot of our codes have generationally come from anecdotal evidence. We know risk category 4 is always the cutting edge of what we think is the best performance we can get. But when you do some of these studies, you don't necessarily always get the performance that you hope. So we have to be aware of that. It's not just the let's design everything to be this category for. So we are at the CLO level discovering or deciding or exploring alternative frameworks and design criteria. This is starting to look at the concept of community-based perspective on recovery, and it looks a lot more at the, let's look at the right thing, at the community as a whole, and what performance or what services are provided as a whole. You'll have a drop in service, and then you'll slowly ramp back up, or maybe you'll ramp back up more quickly, depending on the type of building or the type of building stock you have. So if you look at a community-based perspective, you might be thinking of on a whole, and the NIST Community Resilience Planning Guide has a nice document, a nice table. It starts to quantify what we might hope to achieve in terms of maybe this intermediate facility, what this might be, some Group 2 building, that 30% of them are up in a few days, maybe 60% of them back up in a week, and maybe it's Group 2C, maybe it takes a few weeks for 90% of them to go back this week. This is not this is not an individual building. We're not saying that it's going to be 30% functional in a few days. We're saying that on a whole, as we look through the community, 30% of that type of building hopefully will be functional in that short time. So when we look at the building-based side of things, we realize that at least as the designers, maybe even the code officials, we have a certain sphere that we can influence, this kind of pink sphere that we put around the building. And there's a lot of these other competing factors and externalities that aren't really something we can control through our design process. Certainly not something we can always control through the code process. These external factors affect the way our buildings recover, even though we can only control the part that we design. And so when we look at the functional recovery standard, if we talk about what a functional recovery standard might be looking toward, it might be looking toward the part that we can control as designers. Whereas there might be other policy improvements about how the occupants occupy or are prepared for the event. So they maybe have a business resumption program in place. The utilities, we understand those might be outside the scope of ASC 7 or the IBC, but they need to have a different standard that would affect their performance and their design. So again, if you kind of look back to the CRPG, and you're kind of thinking community-wide, what would it look like if you try to take a stab at what you need to design your buildings to? You might look at targeting that 90% threshold, right? If you want most of your buildings to get ready or get back and be recovered by that 90% time frame, the criteria you start to use might start to align with the 90%. You start to talk about the new and existing conundrum. In some cases, we're talking about some other buildings or some solutions to the problem might be you design new buildings to something a little bit better than what you need to account for the existing buildings that do a little bit worse than what you need, right? So you kind of balance that across your community, but you use that as design criteria. The problem really is making the jump from where we are on the axis to where we expect our buildings to get, or what sort of performance we expect out of them right now, and how do we move them to here. These X's could represent existing buildings designed to lower codes, older codes. It can also represent even just buildings today that are designed to something less than what we hope for in terms of recovery time. So we're talking about that in our recovery working group, functional recovery working group. We're also talking about it in the FEMA NIST committee as well. Things like these performance goals. How do we actually go about succeeding in changing the environment, mandatory versus voluntary? How do we handle the new versus existing? And as much as I say this is the functional recovery working group at the CR side, I know this is also being discussed in other groups like ERI and the FEMA NIST committee. And then when we talk about code-based performance, there's been a question about functional recovery, and at least in the legislative conversation says, well, this means you're going to be setting yourselves up for performance-based design, and it's going to take an exclusive type of engineering that's only going to be able to do this. And we're saying, no. We're trying our best to come up with a code-based criteria, something that looks a lot like the current code, that everybody can implement. It's just that we're changing the way we're addressing it, whether it's in our structural system selection, to select systems that maybe can accommodate damage more readily repairable. Maybe it's strengthened utility requirements to provide us a little bit more of a factor of safety for those. Maybe it's tighter drift limits to limit the damage to the non-structural components. Maybe it's non-structural bracing requirements, maybe making sure the critical components are braced better than they are right now. It's all these things that Kurt is actually studying and doing, as Susan mentioned earlier, I think, maybe it was yesterday, Monday, my days mixed up. The code knobs, right? You start to hear people talk about the code knobs we can turn, the levers we can pull or push to get better performance in what we're doing by using something that's in the code right now. Just the difference between a 2% drift limit to a 1% drift limit for your story drifts makes a big difference. And so we're studying that and trying to come up with the criteria that we can substitute in as an alternate or as a new code change concept. So NEHR provisions get updated every 5 or 6 years. They have this Provisions Update Council. This is the alphabet soup you see here. The SSC, Building Seismic Safety Council. Issue Team 1 has a resource paper that's out to be validated right now by the member organizations that contribute to the NEHR PUC process. It is addressing the relationship between traditional codes and standards and resilient-based design. So some of those concepts I'm talking about are being talked about in 3 or 4 different arenas. This is that same sort of thing. What if we did a traditional code-based design? What can we turn in terms of the knobs? What can we pull in the levers to get better recovery time? And this white paper or resource paper is being validated. If it gets validated positively, except approved by passes, thank you, I'm not in the code language or code adoption language enough, it would be in part 3 just as a resource. It wouldn't be actual provisions. And you kind of saw some maps, I think, in the roadmap that talk about how the NEHR provisions lead into the ASC 7 provisions, which then lead into the IBC provisions. It's an aggressive schedule to get it from part 3 in the 2020 provisions to possibly something in part 1 in the 2025, which then could be ASC 728 and what have you. But I think the message I'm hearing from the policymakers and our elected officials is they're okay with the first generation stab at this thing. They want the best knowledge we have right now. They're okay if it needs to be refined by research as we continue to go. But we can make improvements for what we have. We meet the deadline for that 2030 IBC. It may not be the final answer, but it's something better than we have right now. So I think that roadmap is viable as long as we consider a first generation, second generation concept there. So again, they're considering a lot of the same aspects that other groups, CEOC and ERI have been. What knobs and levers can we push and pull? They're going a little bit beyond it in terms of some of the contents. They're also talking about utilities, so some of the CEOC stuff is related specifically to the buildings. The FEMA NIST group and the IT1 group and ERI are talking a little bit more about the utility side. And they also talk about the recovery planning on the part of the occupants in terms of what are we trying to do here from the building design, but what do our occupants need to be ready to do in order to get back in their building? It's great if the building's standing, but if they're not ready, the same sort of problem. So I just have like 2 or 3 slides left, I promise, so I'm getting there. The FEMA NIST Functional Recovery Committee was established by the reauthorization. Our goal and our charge is to assess and recommend the options for the built environment, meaning both buildings and critical infrastructure, reflecting goals in reoccupancy time and recovery time, functional recovery time. And our deliverable is to submit a report to Congress that gives these recommendations to achieve improvements. And again, we're talking about improvements here. This could be significant steps along the way. This could be the first pass at it. There may be future improvements that can be made. The committee includes perspectives beyond just the engineers. Trust me, I'm one of 3 or 4 on the committee, but it's a committee of 20. We have the perspectives being brought in from the members of the committee. Susan's on it with me. John's on it with us as well. David's on it with us. Now I'm probably going to miss somebody that's on it. But the discussion of options is being informed by all the work that's happening in the industry. So we are acting as liaisons to make sure we're bringing to bear thoughts and the processes and the products that are happening in our agencies and our organizations. And then this discussion of options will include things beyond just design criteria. It will talk about things that local jurisdictions can do, even about planning ordinances. Like maybe it's not smart to build right on fault. Maybe that would improve our functional recovery. Maybe it's good to have emergency management plans in place. Maybe you want to actually require for certain types of buildings in your community some sort of BORP or business resumption program for them to have. Because you spent all this time and energy investing in it, and that facility is so critical to your community, you might need them to be ready to reoccupy to provide that critical service. So those options are being talked about, and it's not just going to be the engineering part of it. Important things for you to remember. Stakeholder Workshops will be in early 2020. I think it's January, February-ish. Our report is due in June. I think if you back it up, I think we actually have to be done around March. So as Heidi said, at the ERI conference, you'll have a better update in March of kind of where things are going. But we want your participation in the stakeholder workshops. You know, looking forward, we've done a lot of work. There's a lot of work happening in multiple different paths, but more work needs to be done. We need to be doing it in parallel. We can't wait for one another to finish first before we start jumping down our own road path. That June 2020 date is a great milestone, but we can't wait for that either. There's a lot of that. We're talking about the messaging, a lot of the definitions. Those sort of things have to be decided before then. So we need you and your organization to look at how can you participate in that FEMA NIST project. Can you come to one of the stakeholder workshops? I don't know the exact locations, but there's 2 or 3 in California, one in the Northwest, one even in St. Louis, or maybe Salt Lake City. So there's going to be breadth of geography that's going to get the input there too. And then if nothing else, I hope that we can talk a little bit today about broadening the audience and the stakeholder participation, because it's great that less than half the room today is engineers. That's fantastic. But I feel at home building officials too. And we need to have more architects, we need to have more planners, we need to have more of the building owners and managers in this conversation so they can hear all these things and see where we're going with all this. So I think that is my summary in 20 minutes. Thank you.